Hey, I have a new friend I want you to meet. I met Matthew, gosh, just within the last year. He pastors a great church out in Yorba Linda, California. It's Friends Church. And Matthew, welcome to the conversation today.
Thanks, Tony. Great to be with you.
I don't want to brag on you, but I will for a moment because you're leading a great church. You've been there for a number of years. I'll let you share a little bit of your story because I think that'll be helpful for the topic of today's conversation. The church is reaching into the thousands in multiple locations now. What impressed me most about your leadership and what's happening at the church, though, is the unique culture you've created. So back up for a second, help us understand your story a little bit and how that relates to the culture that's developed through the years.
Well, thanks. I think, as you know, when you take over a church that was imploding, sometimes there's nowhere to go but up. So I think for us over the last years, I've been at the church 25 years. I've been the senior pastor for 13 years. And I came in, long story short, I was actually let go, but I from my position as executive pastor, but I never left payroll. So that's how I say I've been at the church for 25 years. And uniquely, they called me back after being fired 8 months later to become the lead pastor. And
so they gave you a promotion too.
They gave me a promotion. I think it was a promotion. I'm not quite sure. But I walked in to a church that was, just kind of in a mess. And there had been a split. And we were in the midst of building this 126,000 square foot building, 2,500 seat auditorium. And we were 14 million short. And I had to let go of 32 staff members. Those were my first two jobs.
Wow.
And would you like this job? And I said, no. But God impressed on me that was his call, was to come back into this place. And I was praying that God would help me heal this church. And part of it was I was stepping into a God story. He was the only one that could do what was before us. And so if I look back 13 years, I could never imagine where we are today. But I think if I looked, it was a culture that needed to be changed. It was a culture that needed to be healed. And I think that's where it started, was basically I had to come in and ask people to help us build the building. And then they would look at me and say, well, why should I stay at the church? In those same conversations. And we built a foundation. And I guess it just really started with me actually loving our people right where they were and helping them not accept where we were and go where God was calling us to go. And we started with that foundation, and God has done something that only he can do. And it's been fun to be a part of that.
And I agree, that's the common story here as far as establishing cultures. It really, as much as we want to put strategy around it and try to find a formula to use to create culture, it begins with the top leader, doesn't it?
It does. And, I think I had to walk in and not just say, here's what we're going to do. I had to actually live it out. They were looking at me going, I'd never preached a sermon series. I'd never raised any money. I was in seminary at the time trying to figure out my next steps. And all of a sudden I'm given this responsibility. And I just decided that, you know what, I'm not just going to tell them what to do. I'm going to join them in what we do. And they began to see me, I guess, model that. And I just kept showing up every day, and I kept having a positive attitude and spirit that God was up to something, and I can't wait to see what he was going to do in us so he could do something through us.
So aside from your leadership and how you were trying to live out some of the behaviors and values that you were hoping over time would shape the culture of the church, were there any other intentional steps that you took along the way, Matthew?
Well, as you walk into churches, the first thing that had broken down was trust with leadership, especially in a church situation where there is a chasm or a split or a division. Trust was completely broken. So internally, I had to build that trust up with the staff was there. I walked back in. Some of them thought I was the reason the church was where it was, and maybe that could be the case. So I had to build trust. And I started with just saying to them, hey, my door is open, number one. Number two, you have every permission and right to come into my office if you see something that is not like Christ in me. And you have the permission to ask me. Help me understand. And I always started that way. If you start with the help me understand why you did this or what was going on here, we could probably get to an end that both of us could walk away. Maybe agree to disagree, or maybe we have better understanding of each other. But when my door was open, I began to build trust by just saying, I'm here with you. I'm accountable. And I'm accountable to you as staff. And I have a responsibility to lead you as Christ would lead. So you have the responsibility to tell me when I'm not. And that began an open dialogue. Now, I tell you, my office wasn't flooded, thank the Lord, with people coming in. A couple did come in and say, hey, help me understand, because in that there was so much change and confusion and that lack of trust, that part of that they needed to come in and have an open door. And so we started there, and it still continues today. I remind our staff frequently, it's your responsibility. If you see something in me that's not like Christ, to come and talk to me about that. I'm asking you to join me in this because I want to be a leader that represents him well. So that trust started to build from there.
Well, speaking of staff, how has the culture you're trying to create shaped the team you've tried to build over the years, Matthew?
Well, I think I started from the very beginning understanding who I was and who I wasn't. I'm very secure in the gifts God's given me, and I'm very secure in the gifts he hasn't given me. And so I'm secure in their success. And the way I modeled that in the beginning was I said, you know what, I just know I'm not going to teach every week. I have a communication gift. I believe God's given me that. I don't have the desire to sit in an office for 40 hours a week and just hang out and study. I like to be with people, and I like to lead, and I like to be invested in ministry and in meetings and in the future of the church. And I needed balance, especially in those early days. So I created a teaching team right from the very beginning. I only teach twice a month. That's my normal pattern. And what I did was I didn't just give responsibility to somebody. I gave them authority. And when I began to model not just responsibility, you're going to teach. No, you have authority. Our teaching pastor here leads our teaching teams. He sets the calendar with me, but I give him the authority to kind of lead spiritually. And I'm not advocating my leadership role. I know what that is. I speak into that. I can guide and direct, but he just doesn't have a responsibility to get up and teach twice a month. He's been given the authority to teach twice a month. And the next thing I did was I invested in the next generation. He was about 17 years younger than me. And when I came the lead pastor, I was 35. He was just now coming into his 20s. And he was an intern. And I waited a little bit before I hired the one I have now, and Chris. But I began to give him responsibility and authority. And they began to see that it wasn't just about me and my agenda. It was about building a team and a culture that actually the vision was the first and foremost thing we were going to go after. Not who was going to teach, not my personality. It wasn't driven by me. It was driven by the vision that God had given us. And that began to model for them. We call it, as you know, we, not me. This is about team. And if you want to be a part of this culture, you got to play with the team. And we cross lines of departments. We cross lines of separation. And we try and build a team that's based around the vision, not around a person.
All right. So give some encouragement. There are lead pastors out there. They know the culture of their church, of their team needs to change. Yeah. What are some first steps for those lead pastors to take?
Well, first step is, I think Tolstoy says, if people want to change the world, they never want to change themselves. I think you just have to look deep within yourself and say, what is it about me that needs to change? Well, what is it in me first and foremost that I can begin to model? I think we all want to get to that end, but sometimes in the very beginning, it took me becoming a listener. Yeah, I had to slow down enough to listen to people. Number two, none of us like to be challenged that much. I mean, as leaders, we want people to buy in, but to have an open door and for people to come in, that was huge for me. And the third thing in change is it takes time to change your culture. I was moving like the Titanic. It was sinking. And to try and turn this ship, I just had to be really patient, not only with myself, but with our people. I use this illustration when I drive. When I see yellow lights, I go through them. I don't tend to slow down. How can I get through that before it turns? Yeah. And then my leadership style is the same way. If there's a yellow light of caution, many times I would try and get through that and burst to the green light instead of maybe I need to stop, slow down, reevaluate, invite others to join me in this. But I think those first steps, if you're going to build trust, you're going to change culture. You, number one, got to evaluate yourself and what needs to change in you. And then the second thing is simply, you have to become a good listener. And when people hear you listen, it's not that you do what they want you to do, but they know they've been hurt. And they're more ready to join in with you when you begin to make change and move where you want the culture to go.
Matthew, I've been in the car with you when you've gone through several of those yellow lights, so I can vouch for what you're saying. That's right. Well, again, I just want to thank you for how you're modeling. You have a great church, you're leading a great team, and I really do appreciate how you've developed young leaders in your ministry. They've kind of grown up in your culture, and now you've given them authority, you've given them great responsibility, and I think the church is benefiting from that right now. So thanks for sharing your story.
You bet, Tony. Thanks for all your help.